I am Rebecca, 33 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. My parents skipped my graduation, calling it pointless, but days later, a $25 billion company hired me on the spot for $5 million. Suddenly, Mom called. "We need to talk. Family meeting tomorrow." I showed up with my file. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The afternoon sun was beating down on my heavy black graduation gown as I stood alone in the center of the university courtyard. Hundreds of families milled around me, laughing, popping champagne, and taking endless photographs with their proud graduates. I stood near the campus fountain, tightly clutching the leather diploma holder I had just received. Master of Science in Cybersecurity. The folder felt incredibly heavy in my hands, packed solid with the weight of 5 years of grueling sacrifices and sleepless nights. But looking around the crowded, joyous courtyard, my isolation was deafening. There were no balloons for me, no proud father holding a camera to capture the moment, no mother stepping forward to straighten my collar. Just me, the wind, and a vibrating phone in my pocket. I pulled out my phone foolishly, hoping to see at least a generic congratulatory text message from my family. Instead, the screen lit up with a new notification in our family group chat. The message was from my mother, Catherine. I opened it and the cruel words burned into my vision. "Your father and I cannot make it to the ceremony today," Catherine wrote. "To be honest, a graduation ceremony at your age is a bit pointless and is really just handing out a piece of paper. Today is a massive day for your sister. Jamal and Madison just closed on their $2 million mansion in the Hamptons. We have to stay here in the city to toast to their real estate victory. Family first." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with a familiar, suffocating mixture of rage and profound sadness. Madison was my 29-year-old sister, the undisputed golden child of the family. She had never worked a day in her life. She spent her 20s bouncing between expensive European vacations and superficial socialite events entirely funded by my parents. When she married Jamal, a 32-year-old venture capitalist with a flashy smile, an impeccably tailored wardrobe, and an arrogant swagger, my parents treated the union like a royal wedding. Jamal was an African-American man who exuded wealth, drove imported luxury cars, and spoke in aggressive business buzzwords that completely hypnotized my father. My parents worshipped the ground Jamal walked on because he provided the exact image of high society success they craved. I typed back, my thumbs shaking with exhaustion. "I have worked the night shift at the downtown data center for 4.5 years to pay for this degree. I have $80,000 in student loan debt because you refused to co-sign a single document for me. Meanwhile, you have bailed Madison out of her credit card debt 3 separate times. You cannot spare exactly 2 hours to watch me walk across a stage." I did not wait for a text response. I hit the call button, deciding I was not going to let them dismiss me through a screen on the most important day of my professional life. The phone rang twice before my mother answered. The background noise on her end was loud and festive. I could hear expensive crystal glasses clinking and Jamal bursting into his booming, theatrical laugh echoing through the spacious living room of my parents' house. "Rebecca, your timing is terrible," Catherine said immediately, her voice dripping with extreme irritation. "We are in the middle of a very important celebration." "A celebration for a house," I countered, struggling to keep my voice from breaking under the emotional weight. "I just earned a master's degree that took me 5 years of blood and sweat, a degree in a highly complex field. I created a proprietary data encryption algorithm that my professors called groundbreaking, and you call my graduation pointless." "Oh, please, Rebecca. My father—" Richard cut in abruptly. He must have snatched the phone directly from my mother's hand. His voice carried that familiar, condescending weight that always made me feel like an insignificant child. "Do not start with your jealous tantrums today. You are 33 years old. You should be deeply embarrassed that you are still sitting in a classroom while your sister is buying premium property in the Hamptons. You sit in a dark room staring at computer code all night. That is not a real career. That is a hobby for antisocial people." "It is not a hobby, Dad. It is advanced cybersecurity. It is the future of the tech industry, and I sacrificed everything for this moment. Sacrifice. Richard scoffed loudly, clearly projecting his voice to ensure Jamal and Madison could hear him playing the tough patriarch. You want to talk about sacrifice and success. Success is measured by tangible assets, Rebecca. It is measured by the real estate you own, the investment portfolio you manage, and the social standing you command in the community. A piece of paper from a university does not pay the bills. Jamal is a real businessman. He manages millions of dollars. He provides an incredible life for your sister. Until you can generate the kind of massive wealth Jamal does, I suggest you lower your tone and show some respect for people who actually know how the real world works. Call us when you make some real money. The line went dead. The harsh dial tone buzzed in my ear, perfectly matching the hollow ringing in my chest. I lowered the phone, looking around the sunlit courtyard one last time. Happy families were dispersing, heading off to celebratory dinners at expensive restaurants to shower their graduates with love. I walked alone to the city bus stop, my black graduation gown stuffed carelessly into my canvas tote bag. I arrived at my apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city an hour later. It was a cramped, poorly ventilated studio that smelled faintly of old coffee and burnt electronics. My desk in the corner was a chaotic mess of tangled wires, cooling fans, and 3 monitors glowing with endless lines of green code. This humble desk was where I had spent thousands of isolated hours perfecting my thesis project. It was an advanced quantum-resistant data encryption algorithm designed to secure financial institution databases against next-generation cyber threats. My family thought I was just playing video games in the dark. They had absolutely no idea what I had actually built. I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter and slumped into my worn desk chair. The sheer exhaustion of the past 5 years suddenly hit me like a physical blow. I opened my laptop to check my bank account balance. I had exactly $300 to my name to survive on until my next paycheck from the data center. The $80,000 student loan balance glared at me from the banking portal. My father's cruel words echoed loudly in my mind. Call us when you make some real money. Suddenly, my phone rang, vibrating violently against the wooden desk. The caller ID displayed an unknown corporate number. I assumed it was an aggressive debt collector regarding my student loans or a spam call, but some unexplainable instinct made me answer it. Hello, is this Rebecca? A deep, highly authoritative voice asked. Speaking. Who is this? My name is Harrison Croft. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Aegis Global. My breath caught sharply in my throat and I sat up perfectly straight. Aegis Global was not just a tech company. It was a $25 billion titan in the global cybersecurity sector. They handled elite defense contracts, international banking security networks, and enterprise-level threat management. Harrison Croft was an absolute industry legend, known for his ruthless business acumen and brilliant technological foresight. Mr. Croft, I stammered, gripping the edge of my desk. How can I help you today? I do not want to waste your time with corporate small talk, Rebecca Harrison said, his tone crisp and strictly focused on business. My lead acquisition team attended your university symposium last week. They got a very close look at the core architecture of your thesis project. Your quantum-resistant encryption algorithm. You saw my algorithm. We did much more than see it. We ran intensive simulations based on the framework you published. It is brilliant. It patches a massive zero-day vulnerability we have been trying to solve for our international banking clients for 8 solid months. My engineers could not believe you built this framework in a studio apartment. I have been refining the mathematical logic for over 3 years, I said, my confidence slowly returning as we spoke about my actual area of expertise. I know, Harrison replied smoothly, which is why I am calling you directly instead of sending my recruiters. Aegis Global wants exclusive ownership of your algorithm. We want to buy the proprietary rights outright today. Furthermore, an algorithm of this magnitude is only as good as the architect who maintains it. I am offering you the position of Vice President of Threat Intelligence at our corporate headquarters. The small studio apartment started to spin around me. Vice President at Aegis Global. I am incredibly honored, Mr. Croft. What kind of acquisition numbers are we discussing for the intellectual property? $5 million. Harrison said, his voice completely flat as if he were discussing the price of a cup of coffee. $5 million paid up front, wired directly into your account upon signing the transfer of intellectual property. Your starting salary as vice president will be $400,000 a year, plus extensive executive stock options. We will fast-track the legal paperwork this afternoon. I want you in my office on Monday morning at 8 sharp. Do we have a deal, Rebecca? $5 million. My brain completely short-circuited. I thought about the crushing $80,000 student loan debt that had kept me awake for years. I thought about the grueling 4 years of night shifts managing server racks. I thought about the $2 million Hamptons house my parents were currently popping champagne over, funded by Jamal's mysterious flashy venture capital firm. Send me the contract, Mr. Croft. We have a deal. Excellent. Welcome to the major leagues, Rebecca. My legal team will email the secure digital documents in exactly 5 minutes. I hung up the phone and dropped it onto the desk. My hands were trembling so violently, I had to press them flat against the wood to steady myself. Exactly 5 minutes later, the secure email arrived in my inbox. I read through the 70-page corporate contract with meticulous care. The terms were ironclad and incredibly generous. At exactly 4 in the afternoon on the day of my supposedly pointless graduation, I applied my digital signature to the contract. A confirmation email popped up immediately on my screen. The $5 million wire transfer had been initiated by their finance department and would clear my bank account by Monday morning. I leaned back in my chair, staring blindly at the water-stained ceiling, letting the sheer reality of my new life wash over me. I was a multimillionaire. I was a senior executive at a $25 billion global enterprise. My father had told me to call them when I made real money. Suddenly, the screen of my phone lit up brightly on the desk, shattering the quiet moment. It was a rapid succession of text messages from the family group chat. The tone was completely different from the arrogant celebratory messages sent just a few hours ago. The new message was from Catherine. It read, "Rebecca, come home right now. We need you here. Mandatory family meeting tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. Do not be late. Jamal is dealing with a slight cash flow issue with his investment fund, and we need everyone in the family to pitch in and help immediately. It is an absolute emergency." I stared at the glowing screen, a cold smile forming on my lips. A slight cash flow issue. The untouchable golden son-in-law, the brilliant venture capitalist, who was supposedly just buying a sprawling mansion in the Hamptons, was suddenly begging for a family financial bailout. And my parents, the same people who had just told me I was a worthless failure, whose education meant nothing, were now summoning me to serve as their desperate financial safety net. I did not reply to the message. Instead, I slowly closed my laptop, walked over to my cramped closet, and pulled out my sharpest, most professional business suit. I was absolutely going to attend their mandatory family meeting tomorrow morning. But I would not be walking in as the invisible, disappointing daughter they loved to verbally abuse. I would be walking through their front door as the vice president of threat intelligence for Aegis Global. And I was going to bring a very special, highly revealing file with me. The heavy oak front door of my parents' suburban estate swung open before I even had a chance to ring the bell. My mother, Catherine, stood in the foyer clutching a ceramic mug of herbal tea. Her eyes immediately darted up and down my tailored charcoal business suit. Instead of asking why I was dressed so professionally on a Saturday morning, she simply rolled her eyes and sighed heavily. "You are late, Rebecca," Catherine snapped, turning on her heel and marching toward the living room. "Your father has been pacing for 20 minutes. Come in and sit down. Do not make a scene today. Jamal is under a tremendous amount of stress." I stepped over the threshold, my posture perfectly straight, holding the thick Aegis Global corporate folder tightly against my side. The air in the house felt thick with that familiar, suffocating tension that always preceded one of their financial demands. I followed her into the sprawling, sunlit living room. It was a perfectly curated shrine to my parents' obsession with wealth and status. Crystal vases, imported Persian rugs, and abstract paintings they did not understand, but bought because a gallery owner told them they were expensive. Jamal sat dead center on the white Italian leather sofa, looking like he owned the entire property. He was an impeccably groomed African-American man, wearing a custom-fit navy blue suit without a tie, projecting the exact image of a Silicon Valley billionaire on a casual weekend. His gold luxury watch caught the morning light as he tapped impatiently on the screen of his latest smartphone. He did not even bother to look up or say hello when I walked into the room. He just let out a loud theatrical sigh, acting as though my mere presence was an exhausting inconvenience to his busy schedule. Madison was pacing frantically in front of the marble fireplace. She wore a matching cashmere loungewear set that cost more than my previous monthly rent. The moment she saw me, her face contorted into a mask of exaggerated agony. She grabbed a tissue from the coffee table and began dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes. "Thank God you are finally here," Madison whined, her voice pitched high and breathless. "This is an absolute nightmare, Rebecca. You have to help us. If we lose the Hamptons house, I will never be able to show my face at the yacht club again. My entire summer social calendar will be completely ruined." I remained standing near the archway, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "Hello to you too, Madison." My father Richard stood by the wet bar, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water. He slammed the glass down on the granite counter and pointed a stern finger at me. "Sit down, Rebecca. We do not have time for your sarcastic attitude today," Richard commanded, his voice echoing loudly in the large room. "Your sister and your brother-in-law are dealing with a highly complex financial bottleneck. We called you here because family steps up when it matters. Family protects its own." I slowly walked over to the single armchair opposite the sofa and sat down, placing my Aegis Global folder neatly on my lap. I crossed my legs and looked directly at Jamal. "A financial bottleneck," I repeated calmly. "That is an interesting term. I received a text message saying there was an emergency. So what exactly is the problem, Jamal? Did your massive venture capital fund suddenly run out of cash?" Jamal finally looked up from his phone. He offered me a patronizing, tight-lipped smile, the kind an adult gives to a remarkably slow child. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and laced his fingers together. "Look, Rebecca, I know you do not understand high-level corporate finance." Jamal began, his tone dripping with absolute condescension. "You work with computer servers. You fix internet cables. Capital management is an entirely different beast. My fund currently manages tens of millions of dollars, but right now a significant portion of our liquid capital is tied up in a massive overseas acquisition. It is a highly lucrative deal, but it temporarily restricts my domestic cash flow." And Madison chimed in, rushing over to sit closely beside her husband and clutching his arm dramatically. "The seller of the Hamptons estate is being completely unreasonable. He is threatening to pull out of the escrow agreement if we do not show proof of a $150,000 cash deposit by Monday morning." It is pocket change to Jamal, obviously, but the timing is just horrible. Catherine nodded enthusiastically from the other side of the room. "Exactly. It is just a minor timing issue. A simple bridge loan is all they need." I looked at my mother, then at my father. "And what does this minor timing issue have to do with me?" Richard stepped forward, clasping his hands behind his back. "Jamal cannot take out another traditional loan right now without triggering an audit on his current overseas acquisitions. Your mother and I have already leveraged our liquid assets to cover the down payment on their primary residence last year. But you, Rebecca, you have a completely spotless credit score." I stared at him, letting his words hang in the silent room. "You want me to take out a loan?" Jamal waved his hand dismissively. "Not a major loan, just a personal signature loan for $150,000. With your clean credit history, the bank will approve it instantly. You sign the paperwork, wire the funds to my holding company, and we secure the Hamptons property. I will pay you back the principal plus a 10% bonus within 90 days. It is the easiest money you will ever make." I could not help it. A short, sharp laugh escaped my lips. "You want me to go into $150,000 of personal debt so you can buy a vacation home?" Madison's fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by an ugly, venomous glare. Oh, do not act like this is some massive burden, Rebecca. You live a completely pathetic, isolated life. You do not have a husband. You do not have children to feed. You rent a tiny, depressing apartment and you never buy anything nice. What exactly are you saving your credit score for? A new video game console. Catherine stepped closer to me, lowering her voice into a tone of false, sickeningly sweet maternal reasoning. Madison is right, sweetie. You really do not have any major financial responsibilities. You just finished that computer degree. I am sure you will find some decent entry-level office jobs soon, making 50 or 60,000 a year. You can easily manage the monthly minimum payments until Jamal's overseas funds clear. We let you live in this house for 18 years for free. It is time you paid your dues and supported the people who actually bring prestige to this family. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of their demands settled over me. They truly believed I was nothing but an empty vessel, a convenient financial tool to be used and discarded to fund their obsession with luxury. My father looked at me with cold expectation. My mother looked at me with impatient irritation. Madison looked at me with arrogant entitlement. And Jamal just looked bored, waiting for me to surrender and sign my financial future away for his benefit. I looked down at the Aegis Global folder resting on my lap. Inside was the confirmation of my $5 million signing bonus and a contract guaranteeing me $400,000 a year. But more importantly, inside my briefcase by the door was my laptop. The laptop I had used last night to run a background trace on Jamal's highly lucrative venture capital firm. I slowly uncrossed my legs and sat up straight. The time for listening to their delusions was over. I looked directly into Jamal's eyes, dropping my calm facade and letting the cold, calculating threat intelligence analyst take over. You say your liquid capital is tied up in an overseas acquisition, Jamal, I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal edge that made my father stop pacing. That is a fascinating strategy. Tell me, does the Securities and Exchange Commission know about this overseas acquisition? Because according to the encrypted federal database I accessed at 3 o'clock this morning, your venture capital firm does not have a single legitimate investment portfolio on record. The room plunged into an absolute suffocating silence. The kind of silence that usually follows a devastating car crash. My father froze, his hand still gripping the glass of sparkling water. Madison's jaw actually dropped open. And Jamal, the untouchable golden son-in-law, suddenly looked like a cornered animal. The arrogant, bored expression melted off his face, replaced by a flash of genuine wide-eyed panic. "What are you talking about?" Jamal stammered, his voice completely losing its smooth, practiced cadence. "You do not know what you are looking at. Corporate filings are complex. They are shielded behind multiple holding companies. You cannot possibly understand the architecture of my fund." "I can understand a digital paper trail better than anyone in this room," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I traced the shell companies, Jamal. All 7 of them. They all route back to a single empty account registered in the Cayman Islands. You do not have a venture capital fund. You have a glorified Ponzi scheme that is currently under active investigation by federal authorities. You are not buying a mansion in the Hamptons. You are desperately trying to scrape together $150,000 to pay off early investors who are threatening to report you for wire fraud." "That is a lie," Madison shrieked, jumping up from the sofa. Her face was flushed dark red. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are lying, Rebecca. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of my life, of my husband, of everything I have. You sit in your pathetic little apartment making up wild conspiracy theories because no man will ever look at you the way Jamal looks at me." I ignored Madison completely and turned my gaze to my parents. They were both staring at Jamal, waiting for him to confidently shut down my accusations, to laugh off my claims with his usual charismatic charm. But Jamal was sweating. Actual beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. "Mom, Dad," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured, "I am trying to protect you. Jamal is facing potential federal indictments. If you tie your finances to his right now, if you help him secure this fraudulent loan, you will be implicated as accomplices in a federal financial crime. You could lose this house. You could lose everything." Richard slammed his glass down on the counter with a loud crack. Enough! That is enough, Rebecca, he bellowed, his face turning an angry mottled purple. How dare you come into my house and accuse my son-in-law of federal crimes? Jamal is a respected businessman. He provides a magnificent life for your sister. You are nothing but a malicious, bitter woman trying to sabotage your own family because you cannot stand to see them succeed where you have failed. I am showing you the truth. I insisted, standing up from the armchair. I have the digital footprints right here on my laptop. Let me show you the SEC filings. I do not want to see your fabricated computer garbage, Catherine yelled, stepping forward and positioning herself protectively between me and Jamal. Your father is right. You are utterly toxic, Rebecca. You have always been a disappointment. We ask you for one simple favor, one small gesture of family loyalty, and instead of helping you invent these disgusting lies to destroy your sister's happiness. It is not a lie, I said, my voice rising slightly. He is going to bankrupt you. He is going to drag you down with him. Jamal suddenly stood up, regaining a sliver of his false bravado. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit and let out a forced, hollow laugh. Richard, Catherine, please, do not let her upset you. This is exactly what insecure people do when they are confronted with real success. They try to tear it down. She is obviously having some sort of mental breakdown. I will handle the bridge loan through my private banking contacts tomorrow. It will cost me a bit more in interest, but it is better than dealing with this kind of unhinged family drama. You see what you have done! Madison screamed, tears of pure rage spilling down her cheeks. You have insulted my husband. You have ruined my morning. You are a horrible, toxic person, Rebecca. You will die alone and nobody will care because you push everyone away with your bitter, hateful jealousy. I looked at the four of them. My family. They had constructed an elaborate fantasy world built on luxury brands, country club memberships, and the illusion of endless wealth. And they were so desperate to maintain that fragile illusion that they were willing to violently reject the only person trying to save them from a catastrophic financial collapse. Get out of my house, Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, trembling whisper. He pointed toward the front door. Get out, Rebecca. You are no longer welcome here. Do not call us. Do not come back. As far as I am concerned, I only have one daughter, and her name is Madison. Catherine crossed her arms tightly across her chest, nodding in fierce agreement. You have made your choice, Rebecca. You chose to be a spiteful, lonely woman. Leave us alone. I stood in the center of the living room, the crushing weight of their rejection washing over me. But for the first time in my life, it did not hurt. It did not break me. Because I knew something they did not. I knew the exact value of my worth, and I had the $5 million contract in my folder to prove it. I looked at my father, then at my mother. I will go, I said quietly. But remember this moment. Remember that I tried to warn you. When the federal agents knock on your door, do not call me, because I will not be answering. I turned on my heel and walked out of the living room, my head held high. I did not look back as I crossed the foyer and pulled open the heavy oak front door. The bright morning sunlight hit my face as I stepped out onto the pristine driveway. I walked toward my modest, reliable sedan, feeling a strange, profound sense of liberation. The toxic chains that had bound me to their expectations for 33 years were finally permanently severed. I opened the car door and tossed the Aegis Global folder onto the passenger seat. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out of their driveway for the last time. As I drove away from the sprawling suburban estate, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a new message from Harrison Croft. The wire transfer has cleared, Rebecca. Your account is fully funded. Enjoy your weekend. I will see you in the executive boardroom on Monday morning. We have a lot of work to do. I smiled, a genuine, powerful smile that reached my eyes. The war was far from over. Jamal was desperate, and desperate men always made critical mistakes. He would undoubtedly try to retaliate. He would try to destroy me before his own house of cards collapsed. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought I was just an invisible, pathetic IT worker. He did not know that he had just declared war on the vice president of threat intelligence for the most powerful cybersecurity corporation on the planet, and I was more than ready to play the game on my terms. My cheek still stung with a dull, throbbing heat. The physical memory of my father's heavy hand striking my face just moments before I walked out the door served as a stark reminder of their absolute delusion. I replayed the chaotic sequence in my mind as I navigated the highway back to my apartment. The exact moment I had bypassed their home network security and wirelessly cast my laptop screen directly to their massive 70-inch living room television. The undeniable Cayman Island bank routing numbers, the active federal fraud investigation files, and the shell company diagrams had illuminated the room in glaring high definition. Jamal had completely lost his mind, lunging toward the television, as if he could physically wipe the digital evidence away with his bare hands. My father, blinded by his desperate need to protect his golden son-in-law, had lashed out physically. The sharp sting of his palm against my cheek was followed by his vicious roar, calling me a manipulative liar who engineered fake documents just to ruin my sister's perfect life. That was the exact moment I knew they were entirely beyond saving. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky. I stood before the towering glass and steel monolith of Aegis Global headquarters in the heart of the financial district. I wore a newly purchased tailored navy suit, my posture perfectly straight. The $5 million signing bonus resting securely in my bank account provided an armor of confidence I had never experienced before. I swiped my new executive badge at the security turnstile and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The executive suite was a masterclass in intimidating corporate power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. I was escorted into the corner office where Harrison Croft sat behind a minimalist obsidian desk. He looked exactly like his industry reputation suggested, sharp, calculating, and utterly unbothered by trivial matters. "Good morning," Rebecca, Harrison said, gesturing to the sleek leather chair opposite his desk. "Please sit down. I trust your weekend was eventful." "More than you know, Mr. Croft," I replied, taking a seat. "I am ready to begin the integration of my encryption algorithm into the mainframe." "We will get to the algorithm in a moment," Harrison said, steepling his fingers. "First, we need to address a minor pest control issue. It seems you have a rather desperate fan club." He tapped a key on his keyboard, and a large holographic display screen illuminated on the wall beside us. My eyes scanned the text, and my blood ran freezing cold. It was a formal email sent directly to the Aegis Global Human Resources Department, flagged with high priority. The sender was Jamal, using his fraudulent venture capital firm email address. Copied on the email were my parents, Richard and Catherine. I read the contents, my jaw tightening with every word. Jamal had somehow discovered through his network that Aegis Global had recruited me. The email was a masterclass in character assassination. He claimed, acting as a concerned family member and fellow tech industry executive, that I had been terminated from my previous data center job for attempting to steal corporate intelligence. He alleged that I was currently experiencing a severe psychiatric breakdown and had fabricated my entire thesis project using stolen code. Attached to the email was a scanned PDF of a formal legal demand letter from an attorney my parents had hired. The letter demanded I immediately pay $100,000 to Richard and Catherine for past living expenses and emotional damages. It explicitly stated that if I did not wire the funds within 48 hours, they would take me to court and publicly expose my alleged criminal history to the media, effectively destroying my new career before it even started. I looked away from the screen and met Harrison's gaze. I expected to see concern or perhaps doubt. Instead, I saw a predator examining a very foolish prey. "I can explain this," I started, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "The man who sent this email, Jamal, is my brother-in-law. He runs a fraudulent investment fund and is currently drowning in debt. I exposed his Ponzi scheme to my parents on Saturday, and this is his desperate attempt at retaliation. The legal demand from my parents is purely extortion to fund his bailout." Harrison let out a short, dry laugh. Rebecca, we are a $25 billion cybersecurity enterprise. Before I offered you $5 million and a vice president title, my internal security team ran a level 5 background check on you. We know exactly who you are. We know your credit score, your medical history, and the exact timestamp of every keystroke you made on your thesis. We also ran a tangential check on your immediate family to ensure you were not a liability. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with cold amusement. We know Jamal is running a Ponzi scheme. We know he owes dangerous people a lot of money. The question is not whether we believe this pathetic email. The question is, how do you want to handle it? You are an executive at Aegis Global now. Do you want to handle this like a normal frightened citizen, or do you want to handle this like we do? I looked at the extortion letter on the screen, then back at Harrison. I want to destroy them, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. I want to take away the only thing they care about, their money and their reputation. Harrison smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. Excellent choice. Forward that demand letter to our legal department. Aegis retains the most aggressive corporate litigators in the country. They consider frivolous extortion attempts a recreational sport. Your parents will receive a cease and desist order so legally terrifying it will make their amateur attorney surrender his license. As for Jamal Harrison, continued tapping another key on his desk. He brought up a complex financial dashboard on the screen. My parent company occasionally acquires distressed debt and failing funds through anonymous shell subsidiaries. We absorb them, strip their remaining assets, and liquidate the rest. Does Jamal have any specific property or asset he is desperately trying to leverage right now? I remembered the frantic conversation in the living room. Yes, I said immediately. He is trying to secure a $150,000 bridge loan to close escrow on a $2 million mansion in the Hamptons. He is leveraging his entire fraudulent fund to make it look like he has liquid capital. Harrison typed rapidly for a few seconds. Found it, he murmured. His escrow account is holding by a thread. He is begging private lenders for a buyout to save his firm from defaulting. What if a massive anonymous corporate entity suddenly swooped in and offered to buy his toxic debt, effectively taking ownership of his entire firm and the Hamptons property contract? He would sign the rights away instantly just to get the cash injection to save his own skin. I stared at the screen, the brilliant, ruthless beauty of the plan washing over me. He would throw a massive party to celebrate the buyout. I realized, my mind racing ahead. My parents and my sister are obsessed with social status. If they think Jamal just secured a massive corporate bailout, they will invite every wealthy connection they have to brag about it. Harrison leaned back in his chair, looking extremely satisfied. And how poetic would it be if the executive sent to officially sign the acquisition paperwork at that party was the very woman they just tried to extort? I stood up, adjusting my jacket. Mr. Croft, I am ready to get to work. For the next 4 days, I dove into my new role at Aegis Global with relentless focus. During the day, I integrated my encryption algorithm into the global mainframe, securing international banking networks against advanced cyber threats. I commanded a team of 50 elite security engineers thriving in an environment where my intellect was respected and rewarded. But during the evenings, I worked closely with Harrison and the Aegis acquisitions team. We created an anonymous shell corporation called Apex Holdings. We reached out to Jamal's desperate brokers and offered a highly aggressive buyout of his failing venture capital fund. We offered to assume his debts and secure the Hamptons property, pending a final in-person signature from the fund manager. Just as I predicted, Jamal took the bait instantly. He was a drowning man, and we threw him an anchor disguised as a life preserver. He signed the preliminary digital agreements without even reading the fine print, entirely blinded by the promise of corporate cash. By Thursday afternoon, the trap was fully set. I received an arrogant, gloating text message from Madison. It read, "I told you Jamal was a genius. He just secured a massive corporate buyout. We are keeping the Hamptons house and moving into the billionaire bracket. We are hosting a massive gala on Saturday night to celebrate. I would invite you, but security will not let pathetic losers through the front gate. Have a nice life in your studio apartment." I did not reply. I simply forwarded the message to Harrison. He replied less than a minute later. "Buy a new dress, Rebecca. We are going to a party." I spent Saturday afternoon preparing for the most important night of my life. I walked into an exclusive boutique downtown and purchased a breathtaking emerald green evening gown. It was sharp, elegant, and radiated absolute authority. I paired it with minimalist diamond earrings and sleek stilettos. When I looked in the mirror, the exhausted, debt-ridden student was completely gone. Staring back at me was a high-level corporate executive ready to execute a hostile takeover. The celebration was held at a grand historic ballroom in the center of the city, rented out by Jamal using the very last scraps of his fraudulent credit. Harrison Croft sent his private town car to pick me up. As we pulled up to the venue, the valet rushed to open our doors. Flashbulbs from local society photographers illuminated the entrance. Harrison offered me his arm, his expression calm and predatory. The ballroom was packed with the city's elite. Investors, real estate developers, and socialites sipping vintage champagne. Through the crowd, I spotted my family holding court near the main stage. Jamal was wearing a custom white tuxedo jacket, laughing loudly, and shaking hands playing the role of the triumphant billionaire. Madison clung to his arm, dripping in borrowed diamonds, soaking up the attention. My parents, Richard and Catherine, were actively working the room. I caught the tail end of my mother's conversation with a wealthy local socialite as we moved closer. "Yes, Madison and Jamal are simply extraordinary," Catherine boasted, holding her champagne flute delicately. "We are so blessed. Our other daughter. Oh, we rarely speak of her. She completely lost her way, dropped out of our lives to live in some dismal apartment. We had to cut ties for our own peace of mind. She was just too toxic and jealous to be around our success." Harrison and I stepped fully into the light of the massive crystal chandeliers. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. People recognized Harrison Croft immediately. He was a tech titan, a man whose net worth eclipsed everyone in that room combined. The crowd naturally parted for us, eager to see why a billionaire CEO was gracing a local venture capital party. Madison turned around and her eyes locked onto me. Her smug smile instantly morphed into an ugly sneer of absolute outrage. She let go of Jamal's arm and marched directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished marble floor. "What are you doing here, Rebecca?" Madison hissed, her voice loud enough to draw stares from the surrounding guests. "I specifically told security not to let gatecrashers in. Are you so desperate for a free meal that you had to sneak into my husband's victory party?" "Security, get this pathetic loser out of here right now." Richard and Catherine hurried over, their faces pale with embarrassment and fury. Jamal followed closely behind them, but his confident swagger vanished the second his eyes landed on the man standing beside me. Jamal knew exactly who Harrison Croft was. Every person in the finance and tech industry knew exactly who he was. "Rebecca, you are causing a scene," my father growled, grabbing my arm to pull me away from the crowd. "You are completely unhinged. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing. Do not ruin this night for your sister." I calmly pulled my arm out of his grasp. Harrison stepped slightly forward, his commanding presence alone silencing my father. "I assure you, Richard, no one is trespassing today," Harrison said, his voice smooth and deadly. "I received a formal invitation to finalize the acquisition of your son-in-law's venture capital fund. And naturally, I brought my lead executive to oversee the transition and finalize the paperwork." Harrison signaled to the event coordinator, who quickly handed him a wireless microphone. The low hum of conversation in the entire ballroom fell dead silent. Harrison's voice boomed through the high-end speakers, demanding absolute attention. "Good evening, everyone. I am Harrison Croft, CEO of Aegis Global. We recently acquired the assets of Jamal's investment firm through our subsidiary Apex Holdings. However, I am not the architect of this buyout. I would like to introduce the brilliant mind who audited this entire operation. Aegis Global's Vice President of Threat Intelligence, Rebecca." A collective gasp echoed through the room. My mother dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound cutting through the silence. Madison stared at me, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. I took the microphone from Harrison. I looked directly into Jamal's terrified eyes, then at my parents' shocked faces. Good evening, I said, my voice ringing clear and steady across the ballroom. Jamal invited you all here to celebrate a massive corporate buyout. But there is a slight miscommunication about the nature of this deal. Aegis Global did not buy a thriving venture capital fund. We bought 72 pages of federal wire fraud. Jamal took a step backward, his face turning an ashen gray. He looked around wildly, searching for an exit. As of this afternoon, my security team completed a full forensic audit of Jamal's accounts. I continued addressing the silent crowd. There is no Hamptons mansion. There is no international acquisition. He has been running a Ponzi scheme, paying early investors with the deposits of new ones. He generated fake returns to fund his luxury lifestyle and threw this very party using stolen money. I turned specifically to look at my parents. The color had completely drained from their faces. Including the money you gave him, I said, my voice echoing mercilessly. Richard Catherine, you did not just co-sign a bridge loan. When you handed over your financial credentials to help him clear his bottleneck, Jamal secretly leveraged the deed to your suburban estate as collateral for his fraudulent debts. You literally handed him the keys to your financial ruin. You are lying, Madison screamed, her voice cracking in pure hysteria. She grabbed Jamal's arm, shaking him violently. Tell them she is lying, Jamal. Tell them she is just a jealous, bitter dropout. But Jamal could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom. He did not get the chance to run. The heavy doors swung open with a loud crash. 5 federal agents wearing tactical FBI windbreakers marched into the room, their badges flashing under the chandelier light. Jamal, an agent, announced, his voice cutting through the rising panic of the crowd. You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The agents surrounded him, instantly pulling his arms behind his back and snapping cold metal handcuffs onto his wrists. Madison dropped to her knees on the marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her perfect, wealthy husband being dragged away like a common criminal. The high society guests, the people my parents had desperately tried to impress all night, began backing away from my family in absolute disgust. My father clutched his chest, struggling to breathe, as the reality of his lost suburban estate washed over him. My mother fell against him, crying hysterically, completely stripped of her arrogant, judgmental facade. Harrison gently placed a hand on my shoulder. My work here was done. The truth was out, the fraud was stopped, and the people who had treated me like garbage had just publicly orchestrated their own spectacular demise. I handed the microphone back to the event coordinator, turned my back on my broken family, and walked out of the ballroom, leaving them to choke on the ashes of their fake empire. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped out of the historic ballroom, leaving the flashing police lights and the chaotic screams of my family far behind me. I climbed into the back of the waiting town car, the heavy tinted doors shutting out the noise of the world. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I only felt an immense, clarifying emptiness. The toxic roots that had anchored me to Richard, Catherine, and Madison were permanently eradicated. By Monday morning, the financial world was burning with the news of Jamal's spectacular arrest. I walked through the towering glass doors of Aegis Global headquarters, my heels clicking sharply against the polished slate floor. The atmosphere inside the $25 billion fortress was electric. Security personnel nodded respectfully as I passed. Junior analysts parted ways in the corridors. I swiped my executive badge at the biometric scanner and took the private elevator directly to the top floor. I bypassed my own office and walked straight into the executive boardroom. Harrison Croft was already there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He held a tablet in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. He did not turn around immediately when the glass doors slid shut behind me. The SEC and the FBI have frozen every single asset tied to Jamal and your parents, Harrison said, his voice a smooth, calculating hum. The Hamptons property is back on the market. Their suburban estate is currently being processed for federal seizure. It was a highly efficient weekend, Rebecca. I took a seat at the long, obsidian conference table, opening my laptop. Actions have consequences, Mr. Croft. They built a house of cards on stolen funds and arrogant delusions. I simply opened the window and let the wind do the rest. Harrison finally turned around, a sharp, predatory smile playing on his lips. He walked over and took the seat directly across from me. He placed his tablet on the table and slid it forward. Unfortunately, desperate people rarely know when to surrender. Harrison said, his tone shifting to pure cold business. Your parents sent another correspondence to our human resources and legal departments at 4 o'clock this morning. They also copied multiple tech media outlets. I looked down at the tablet. It was a formal legal demand drafted by a cheap strip mall attorney, accompanied by a rambling, frantic email from my father. Richard and Catherine were doubling down. Instead of realizing they were defeated, they were attempting to extort me to pay for Jamal's bail and their own mounting legal defense fees. The email was a masterclass in pathetic delusion. Richard claimed that my quantum-resistant encryption algorithm was actually stolen property. He blatantly lied, stating I had developed it using equipment funded by Jamal's venture capital firm, making it their intellectual property. The attached legal letter demanded an immediate settlement of $5 million, exactly the amount of my signing bonus. If Aegis Global and I did not comply within 24 hours, they threatened to launch a massive media smear campaign, alleging corporate espionage and elder abuse, promising to drag the Aegis brand through the mud. I read the entire document without blinking. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no betrayal, just a clinical, analytical detachment. They actually think they can strong-arm a $25 billion corporation with a fabricated story and a discount lawyer, I said, pushing the tablet back toward Harrison. It is almost fascinating how deeply their narcissism has damaged their basic logic. Most corporations would view this kind of media threat as a liability, Harrison noted, leaning back in his leather chair and watching me closely. A messy public family dispute can cause shareholder anxiety. Some boards would ask an executive to step down or take a leave of absence to avoid the negative press. I met his gaze dead on, recognizing the test in his words. But Aegis Global is not most corporations, and you do not fire your executives over amateur extortion attempts. Harrison chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. No, Rebecca, we do not. We weaponize their stupidity. I pulled my laptop closer and let my fingers hover over the keyboard. I am going to completely dismantle them, I stated, my voice devoid of any warmth. I am going to turn this pathetic extortion attempt into a federal weapon. I accessed the Aegis secure network and pulled up the raw data from their email. They are claiming I stole intellectual property. They are demanding money under the threat of reputational destruction. In the state of New York, that crosses the threshold from civil slander into felony extortion. Harrison tapped a button on his desk console. Two members of the Aegis Elite Legal Counsel stepped into the boardroom, completely silent, holding digital notepads. Show them what you found, Rebecca, Harrison commanded. I projected my screen onto the holographic display at the center of the table. I bypassed their cheap virtual private network in exactly 12 seconds. The email was routed through a public coffee shop server near their suburban estate, but the device identifier matches my father's personal laptop. The MAC address is identical to the one he used to log into his banking portal last week. I pulled up a secondary screen displaying the timestamp data from my original university servers. My thesis project was logged, encrypted, and copyrighted on university servers 3 full years before Jamal even registered his fraudulent shell companies. I have the digital chain of custody. It is mathematically impossible for me to have used his resources. The senior corporate attorney adjusted his glasses, looking at the data with surgical precision. This is textbook wire fraud and extortion? He confirmed, his voice devoid of any emotion. By sending this threat across state lines using digital communications, they have committed a federal offense. We do not even need to file a civil defamation suit. We can hand this directly to the FBI agents who are currently dismantling their son-in-law's finances. Do it, Harrison ordered without a second of hesitation. Package the IP logs, the email headers, and the MAC address verification. Draft a formal corporate impact statement detailing their attempt to extort an Aegis Global executive. Hand-deliver the entire dossier to the federal prosecutor handling Jamal's case before noon. The attorneys nodded synchronously and exited the room, moving with the terrifying efficiency of a highly funded corporate machine. They did not care about family dynamics, they cared about neutralizing a threat to their assets. I watched the glass doors slide shut, realizing the absolute finality of what had just happened. My parents had tried to use the media and the legal system to terrorize me one last time. Instead, they had just handed a team of ruthless corporate lawyers the exact evidence needed to put them behind bars, alongside their precious golden son-in-law. Harrison poured himself another cup of coffee, looking out over the city skyline. You handle pressure remarkably well, Rebecca. Most people would be emotionally compromised right now. Emotions are a vulnerability in cybersecurity, I replied, closing my laptop. You cannot secure a network if you are busy feeling sorry for the hackers trying to breach it. My parents tried to breach my life. I simply engaged the firewall. Harrison turned around, raising his coffee cup in a silent toast. A flawless execution. Your family thought they could dictate your value because they controlled your environment for so long. They failed to realize that you changed the environment the moment you signed my contract. They measured success by the cars they drove and the zip codes they lived in, I said, standing up from the table. They never understood that true power is not loud. It does not need to boast at country clubs or throw lavish galas with stolen money. True power is quiet. It is having the ability to completely erase a threat with a few lines of code and a well-drafted legal brief. I picked up my laptop and walked toward the boardroom exit. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, ironclad certainty. My past was officially dead and buried under a mountain of federal evidence. Take the rest of the morning to settle into your new office, Harrison said as I reached the door. We have a Defense Department briefing at 2 o'clock. We need your algorithm integrated into the Pentagon protocols by the end of the week. I will have the integration framework ready by 1, I replied. I stepped out of the boardroom and walked down the executive corridor toward my new corner office. The heavy oak doors, the screaming matches, the endless financial manipulation, it all belonged to a different lifetime. I was no longer the invisible, disappointing daughter begging for a scrap of validation. I was the architect of my own empire, and I had just locked the gates. I spent Friday morning inside the secure glass walls of my new corner office, reviewing the final acquisition documents Jamal had blindly authorized. Through the creation of our anonymous shell corporation, Apex Holdings, we were now the sole proprietors of his fraudulent venture capital fund. We owned his toxic debt, his frozen assets, and the highly contested escrow contract for the Hamptons property. But more importantly, because my parents had foolishly leveraged their suburban estate to back his initial bridge loans, Apex Holdings now held the primary lien on their home. Jamal was so desperate to escape federal prison that he had signed away my parents' financial safety net without a second thought. He traded their entire future for a temporary illusion of salvation. Through the digital monitoring tools legally embedded in our acquisition audit, I watched the immediate fallout of his supposed victory unfold in real time. Jamal instantly began transferring what he thought was fresh operational capital to appease his angriest early investors. He did not know it was carefully tracked bait money monitored by the federal government. He was plugging holes in a sinking ship, completely unaware that I controlled the ocean. Meanwhile, Madison went on an absolute rampage of conspicuous consumption. Bank alerts flashed across my secondary monitor as she maxed out the last of their available credit limit at luxury boutiques downtown. She purchased a $20,000 diamond necklace, a custom white tuxedo for Jamal, and reserved the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive historic hotel. She was spending money that did not exist, charging it to a corporate account that I now legally managed. Richard and Catherine were busy working the phones. I accessed the metadata of their outgoing calls. They were contacting every wealthy socialite, every country club board member, and every local business magnate they knew. They were spinning a magnificent, entirely fabricated tale about their brilliant son-in-law who had just orchestrated a historic corporate merger. I could perfectly imagine my mother's smug, practiced voice bragging about how our family was ascending to a new echelon of high society. And of course they were using this fictional triumph to further assassinate my character. I monitored an email my father sent to his golf partner, claiming that my absence from the upcoming gala was due to my institutionalization for a severe mental breakdown. He spun a pathetic narrative, claiming it was a necessary step they had to take to protect the family from my violent jealousy over Madison's extreme wealth. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded by their own narcissism. They actually believed they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded their defective daughter, secured their elite status, and outsmarted the federal government. The sheer magnitude of their arrogance was staggering, but it only made the impending execution that much sweeter. Harrison stepped into my office just before lunch. He handed me a sleek black envelope containing a premium VIP invitation to the gala. It had been sent to the executive board of Apex Holdings. Jamal was so desperate to impress his mysterious new corporate saviors that he had extended an open invitation to the anonymous executives who had supposedly bailed him out. He is expecting a team of naive corporate suits he can dazzle with cheap champagne and rented sports cars, Harrison said, leaning against my desk. He wants to convince us to inject another $10 million into his operational budget by next quarter. The FBI has confirmed they are ready to move. The warrants are signed. They are just waiting for the transfer of ownership to be publicly finalized at the event. I want to be the one to hand him the final execution order, I said, staring at the gold-embossed invitation. Harrison smiled a cold, sharp expression. I would not have it any other way. Friday evening, I walked into an ultra-exclusive boutique in the financial district. I did not look at the price tags. I selected a floor-length, razor-sharp emerald green gown that radiated absolute unapologetic authority. It was not a dress meant for blending in. It was a dress meant to command a room. I paired it with severe, minimalist diamond earrings and stilettos that echoed against the pavement like a gavel striking wood. When I looked in the mirror, the exhausted, debt-ridden student was completely gone. Staring back at me was a high-level corporate executive ready to execute a hostile takeover. Saturday morning arrived with a calm, quiet intensity. I spent the hours finalizing the digital chain of custody for the federal prosecutor. I meticulously packaged every forged document, every desperate text message, and every illegal wire transfer Jamal had initiated over the past 48 hours. I linked my parents' fraudulent extortion attempt directly to his shell companies, proving beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt that they were complicit in attempting to secure funds for an illegal enterprise. The dossier was bulletproof. It was a financial death sentence bound in a neat digital bow. As the sun began to set over the city skyline, painting the clouds in bruised shades of purple and gold, a black town car pulled up to the front of my apartment building. I looked around the cramped, poorly ventilated studio one last time. The humming servers, the tangled wires, the water-stained ceiling. This room had been my prison and my war room. I had starved here. I had cried here. And I had been repeatedly told I was nothing here. I picked up my clutch, locked the door, and walked away. I would never set foot in this place again. Sitting in the plush leather seat in the back of the town car, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows, my phone vibrated. Another message from Madison. She could not resist twisting the knife one final time before her moment of glory. "The ballroom looks spectacular, Rebecca," her message read. "Dad is giving a speech tonight about how proud he is of his successful children. Oh, wait, child. Singular. I hope you enjoy your microwave dinner. We will send you some leftovers." I locked the screen of my phone and slipped it into my clutch. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They had demanded my compliance, mocked my ambitions, and demanded my absolute financial ruin just to maintain their fake empire. Tonight they were going to learn a brutal, unforgettable lesson. You do not invite a wolf into your house and expect it to behave like a sheep, especially when the wolf now owns the house. The town car glided to a smooth halt in front of the historic downtown hotel. Valets rushed forward to open the doors. Flashbulbs from local society photographers illuminated the entrance, capturing the arrival of the city elite. I stepped out onto the red carpet, adjusting the emerald silk of my gown. Harrison Croft emerged from the other side looking impeccably dangerous in a custom-tailored tuxedo. He offered me his arm. We walked up the grand marble steps together, leaving the cold night behind us, ready to burn their perfectly curated fantasy to the ground. The heavy brass doors of the grand ballroom swung open, revealing a grotesque monument to financial fraud. Jamal had spared absolutely no expense to construct this temporary illusion of absolute supremacy. A towering champagne fountain bubbled continuously in the exact center of the room, illuminated by spotlights. Dozens of waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with imported caviar, Wagyu beef appetizers, and truffles. A live string quartet played classical renditions of modern pop songs on a raised stage draped entirely in rare white orchids. It was a spectacular, sickening display of a desperate man spending his final hours of freedom burning through stolen cash to maintain a lie. Hain. Harrison handed his dark wool overcoat to a valet and grabbed 2 flutes of vintage champagne from a passing tray. He handed one to me, his eyes scanning the massive room with the clinical detached precision of a sniper identifying high-value targets. I located Jamal immediately. He was standing near the center of the ballroom, exactly where a raging narcissist belongs. He wore the custom white tuxedo Madison had purchased on fraudulent credit just hours ago. He was surrounded by a tight circle of local real estate developers, minor politicians, and wealthy socialites. I could hear his booming, arrogant laugh echoing loudly over the elegant music. He was actively selling them the illusion of his massive corporate buyout, using the fake Aegis Global acquisition to validate his genius. I am telling you, gentlemen, the tech sector is practically begging for visionary leadership, Jamal boasted, waving his hands expansively. When the executives at Apex Holdings approached me, I told them my terms were non-negotiable. They begged me to let them buy out my fund because they know my portfolio guarantees double-digit returns. I am opening a secondary investment tier next week for close associates only. If you want a piece of the pie before we go public, tonight is the night to write the check. He was actively trying to snare new victims into his Ponzi scheme right in the middle of his own victory party. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. A few yards away, Madison was holding court with a group of elite country club wives. She was practically vibrating with smug, unearned satisfaction. The $20,000 diamond necklace rested heavily on her collarbone, catching the brilliant light of the overhead chandeliers. She touched the jewels constantly, ensuring every woman in her circle noticed the blinding clarity of the stones. I watched her point a manicured finger toward the large digital display screens positioned around the room. The screens looped a highly edited, glamorous slideshow of the Hamptons estate they falsely believed they were closing on come Monday morning. "We are completely redesigning the West Wing," Madison bragged, her voice pitched high to ensure maximum attention. Jamal insisted we need a larger entertaining space for the summer galas. It is exhausting managing multiple properties, of course, but when your husband is a financial prodigy, you simply have to adapt to the billionaire lifestyle. One of the wives smiled enviously. "You are so incredibly lucky, Madison. Does your sister ever visit you? I heard she was living in the city." Madison let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh, Rebecca. No, we do not invite her to our properties. It is terribly sad, really. She works some mind-numbing data entry job and lives in a shoebox. She is fiercely jealous of my marriage. Jamal actually had to ban her from our home because her bitter energy was just dragging down our entire aura. We tried to help her, but you cannot fix someone who refuses to be successful." I gripped the stem of my champagne flute, keeping my expression entirely neutral. But the true masterpiece of delusion was unfolding near the private bar. I moved slightly closer with Harrison stepping seamlessly behind a massive marble pillar to observe my parents. Richard and Catherine were speaking with the president of the local bank and his wife. My parents stood with perfect posture, projecting the refined image of seasoned, humble aristocrats who had simply guided their brilliant children to global success. I listened as Catherine placed a hand over her heart, adopting a look of profound, tragic sorrow. "It is just such a blessing," Catherine sighed dramatically. "Jamal and Madison are the absolute pillars of this family. We could not be prouder of the empire they are building." The bank president nodded respectfully, taking a sip of his bourbon. "They are certainly making waves. And your other daughter, Is she not here to celebrate tonight? I heard she recently completed a master degree. Richard stepped in quickly, shaking his head with a perfectly rehearsed expression of heavy paternal grief. We prefer not to speak about it on such a joyous night, but since you ask, it is an absolute tragedy. Rebecca suffered a complete psychological collapse. She became dangerously obsessed with Jamal's financial success. The jealousy consumed her until she completely lost her grip on reality. Catherine dabbed the corner of her eye with a cocktail napkin, playing the role of the devastated mother with Oscar-worthy precision. We had to make the agonizing decision to institutionalize her. She was fabricating wild, paranoid delusions about Jamal's finances. She even tried to forge documents to ruin his reputation out of pure spite. We pay for the best private psychiatric facility in the state, of course, but she refuses to let us visit. We had to cut ties to protect Madison and Jamal from her toxic, violent outbursts. It breaks my heart, but we must protect the family. The sheer breathtaking malice of their lie washed over me like ice water. They were not just ignoring my existence. They were actively assassinating my character to elevate their own social standing. They were painting me as a deranged, jealous lunatic to preemptively discredit any truth I might ever try to expose. They used my name as a stepping stone to build their own tragic, heroic narrative, soaking up the sympathetic pats on the arm from the elite wives. Harrison stepped up right beside me, having heard every single word of their performance. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. I have dismantled hostile corporate boards, gutted corrupt enterprises, and dealt with international mercenaries, Harrison murmured, his voice laced with dark, razor-sharp amusement. But the sheer sociopathic audacity of your parents truly belongs in a clinical textbook. They are digging their own graves with a silver spoon. I looked at my father, who was now laughing loudly with the bank president, completely unbothered by the monstrous lie he had just delivered about his own daughter. I looked at my mother, smiling graciously as a waiter handed her a fresh drink. They had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. They had mortgaged their family home to fund this exact moment. They had sold their souls for a few hours of fake applause. I set my untouched champagne glass down on a passing silver tray. I smoothed the emerald silk of my gown and looked up at Harrison. It is time to introduce them to the architect of their destruction, I said. Harrison offered his arm again, and I took it. We stepped out from the shadows of the marble pillar and walked directly into the center of the ballroom. The string quartet was playing a lively tempo, but as we moved through the sea of guests, a palpable hush began to ripple outward. People naturally stepped aside. Power has a gravitational pull, and Harrison Croft possessed enough gravity to command a room without speaking a single word. I walked beside him with my head held high, the emerald silk of my gown sweeping across the floor. I locked my eyes straight ahead, ignoring the whispers of the local socialites who were desperately trying to figure out who the billionaire CEO had brought to their provincial gathering. It took exactly 30 seconds for Madison to notice the shift in the room's energy. She turned away from her circle of country club wives, her eyes scanning the crowd, before locking dead onto me. For a fraction of a second, absolute shock registered on her face. She could not comprehend how the sister she had just declared institutionalized was standing 50 feet away, draped in couture and holding the arm of a global tech titan. The shock instantly morphed into territorial rage. Madison shoved past a waiter, her heels striking the marble floor with aggressive, angry steps. She marched directly toward us, her face flushed dark red, completely abandoning her refined socialite persona. "What are you doing here, Rebecca?" Madison hissed, stopping just 2 feet in front of us. Her voice was loud, sharp, and designed to draw the attention of everyone nearby. "Are you completely insane? I specifically gave security a photo of you to ensure you were kept out. Are you so desperate for a free meal that you had to sneak in the back door?" I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I just looked at her with clinical detachment. "Security," Madison yelled, waving her hand frantically toward a guard standing by the entrance. "Get this pathetic loser out of here right now. She is trespassing. She is having a psychiatric episode, and she is trespassing at my husband's victory party." The security guard started to move forward, But Harrison simply turned his head and gave the man a single freezing look. The guard froze mid-step, instantly recognizing that he was about to lay hands on a man who could buy the hotel and fire everyone in it. The guard quietly backed away and retreated to his post. Madison stared at the retreating guard in pure disbelief. She turned her furious gaze to Harrison, completely failing to recognize who he was. "Who do you think you are?" Madison demanded, pointing a manicured finger at Harrison's chest. "Do you have any idea who my husband is? My husband just secured a massive corporate buyout. You are interfering with a private event. Take your cheap date and get out of our ballroom before I have you both arrested." Harrison let out a short, dry laugh. He looked at Madison as if she were a fascinating, particularly unintelligent insect. "Your husband secured a buyout from Apex Holdings." Harrison stated, his voice a smooth, lethal hum that carried effortlessly over the quiet crowd. "I am the chief executive officer of the parent corporation that owns Apex Holdings. I am the man who approved the purchase of your husband's highly questionable debt. And this cheap date on your arm is my vice president of threat intelligence. So I highly suggest you lower your finger before I decide to cancel the acquisition and let the federal government handle your husband's massive financial crimes." Madison's arm dropped to her side as if she had been physically struck. The color drained completely from her face. She stared at Harrison, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. I stepped slightly forward, closing the distance between my sister and myself. I looked down at the $20,000 diamond necklace resting heavily on her collarbone. "You should enjoy wearing those diamonds tonight, Madison," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, razor-sharp whisper. "Because you charged them to a corporate account that my department flagged for fraudulent activity 4 hours ago. By Monday morning, those stones will belong to a federal evidence locker. You have spent your entire life playing the perfect wealthy victim, but the show is officially over. Your script has been revoked." Before Madison could recover from the absolute shock, Richard and Catherine shoved their way through the crowd. They had witnessed the commotion from across the room and were rushing over to perform damage control. They arrived breathless, their faces tight with panic and barely suppressed rage. "Rebecca, what is the meaning of this?" Richard growled, stepping in front of Madison protectively. He kept his voice low, desperately trying to prevent the surrounding guests from hearing the confrontation. "You are humiliating this family. We told everyone you were violently ill. We told them you were locked away for your own good. You need to leave right now before you ruin your sister's night." Catherine grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "You spiteful, jealous girl," she hissed through gritted teeth, maintaining a fake, strained smile for the onlookers. "You could not stand to see Jamal succeed. You had to come here and make a scene. I will call the police myself if you do not walk out those doors." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she felt the sheer freezing intensity of my gaze. She slowly released her grip, taking a hesitant step back. "You told the president of the bank that I was in a psychiatric facility?" I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the sudden quiet of the ballroom. "You told your country club friends that I was violently obsessed with Jamal's success. You constructed an entire fictional narrative to explain my absence, because the truth would absolutely destroy your precious social standing." "Keep your voice down," Richard demanded, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "You are acting completely unhinged. You are proving our point for us." Harrison stepped directly into Richard's personal space, towering over my father with effortless authority. "The only people acting unhinged are the two individuals who recently submitted a fabricated extortion demand to my legal department," Harrison said, his tone utterly merciless. "You demanded $5 million from one of my top executives under the threat of media defamation. You claimed she stole corporate property. You used an unsecured coffee shop network to send the email, which my security team traced directly back to your personal laptop in exactly 12 seconds. Richard's eyes darted frantically around the room. He looked at Harrison, the realization of his catastrophic mistake finally beginning to dawn on him. "You are Harrison Croft." Richard stammered, the arrogance draining out of his posture, leaving him looking like a terrified hollow shell of a man. "I am Harrison," confirmed smoothly. And you are a man who committed felony wire fraud by attempting to extort a high-level executive at Aegis Global. My legal team handed your entire digital footprint over to a federal prosecutor yesterday afternoon. I am not here to negotiate with you, Richard. I am here to watch my vice president dismantle the fraudulent empire you foolishly leveraged your own home to protect. Catherine let out a sharp, terrified gasp. She pressed a hand against her mouth, looking frantically between me and my father. They had assumed I was a helpless, isolated target. They never imagined I possessed the power to mobilize a $25 billion corporate legal team to crush them. Jamal finally broke through the crowd, practically sprinting toward us. He wore the custom white tuxedo jacket, but he was sweating profusely. He had seen Harrison Croft from across the room and realized instantly that his fake victory was rapidly turning into a public execution. "Mr. Croft," Jamal said, his voice cracking slightly as he extended a trembling hand. "This is a surprise. I did not expect the CEO of the parent company to attend. We have a private VIP room set up in the back. We can discuss the final acquisition signatures away from the crowd." Harrison did not take his hand. He did not even look at Jamal. He simply looked at me. "I am not the one executing the final signatures," Harrison stated coldly. "You need to speak to the lead auditor of the Apex Holdings acquisition team." Jamal turned to look at me. His arrogant swagger was entirely gone. He looked like a man staring down the barrel of a loaded weapon. "You?" Jamal breathed, the horrifying realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You are the executive who approved the buyout." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. "I am the executive who audited your entire operation, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am the one who traced the 7 shell companies you registered in the Cayman Islands. I am the one who tracked the fake returns you generated to pay off your early investors. I know exactly how much money you stole, and I know exactly how desperate you were to secure that $150,000 bridge loan from my parents." Jamal took a staggering step backward. He looked at Madison, who was now trembling uncontrollably, then at my parents, who were staring at him in absolute horrifying realization. "You set me up," Jamal whispered, his voice shaking with pure panic. "You created the anonymous shell corporation. You offered the buyout just to get access to my financial ledgers." "I did not set you up," I replied sharply. "You built a criminal enterprise. I just turned on the lights. You signed the preliminary digital agreements granting my corporation total access to your accounts. You handed me the legal authority to seize your assets, freeze your pending real estate escrows, and hand your entire fraudulent operation over to federal authorities." The surrounding crowd of elite guests had gone completely silent. They were hanging on to every single word. The local real estate developers and wealthy socialites who had been praising Jamal just minutes ago were now backing away from him as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. "You cannot do this," Jamal begged, his voice rising in desperation. He looked around the room trying to find a friendly face, but met only cold, disgusted stares. "You are my family. We can work this out internally. I can restructure the fund. I can pay everyone back." "You are not a businessman, Jamal," I stated, my voice echoing relentlessly across the ballroom. "You are a thief playing dress-up in a rented tuxedo. You convinced my parents to mortgage their suburban estate to back your failing loans. When this night is over, you will have absolutely nothing, and neither will they." Madison grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin again. She was crying hysterically now, completely abandoning her high society persona. "Rebecca, please." Madison sobbed, her voice breaking. "Stop this. You are ruining my life. You are ruining our family. Just make the transfer. Give Jamal the money. You have $5 million. You can save us." I looked down at my sister, the golden child who had spent her entire life mocking me, belittling my ambitions, and demanding my financial ruin to fund her luxury. I firmly removed her hand from my arm. I stepped back, standing shoulder to shoulder with Harrison Croft. "I am not your safety net, Madison," I said, my words striking with absolute, uncompromising finality. "I am your consequence." The heavy brass doors of the grand ballroom swung open, revealing a grotesque monument to financial fraud. Jamal had spared absolutely no expense to construct this temporary illusion of absolute supremacy. A towering champagne fountain bubbled continuously in the exact center of the room, illuminated by spotlights. Dozens of waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with imported caviar, Wagyu beef appetizers, and truffles. A live string quartet played classical renditions of modern pop songs on a raised stage draped entirely in rare white orchids. It was a spectacular, sickening display of a desperate man spending his final hours of freedom burning through stolen cash to maintain a lie. Harrison handed his dark wool overcoat to a valet and grabbed 2 flutes of vintage champagne from a passing tray. He handed one to me, his eyes scanning the massive room with the clinical, detached precision of a sniper identifying high-value targets. I located Jamal immediately. He was standing near the center of the ballroom, exactly where a raging narcissist belongs. He wore the custom white tuxedo Madison had purchased on fraudulent credit just hours ago. He was surrounded by a tight circle of local real estate developers, minor politicians, and wealthy socialites. I could hear his booming, arrogant laugh echoing loudly over the elegant music. He was actively selling them the illusion of his massive corporate buyout, using the fake Aegis global acquisition to validate his genius. I am telling you, gentlemen, the tech sector is practically begging for visionary leadership, Jamal boasted, waving his hands expansively. When the executives at Apex Holdings approached me, I told them my terms were non-negotiable. They begged me to let them buy out my fund because they know my portfolio guarantees double-digit returns. I am opening a secondary investment tier next week for close associates only. If you want a piece of the pie before we go public, tonight is the night to write the check. He was actively trying to snare new victims into his Ponzi scheme right in the middle of his own victory party. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. A few yards away, Madison was holding court with a group of elite country club wives. She was practically vibrating with smug, unearned satisfaction. The $20,000 diamond necklace rested heavily on her collarbone, catching the brilliant light of the overhead chandeliers. She touched the jewels constantly, ensuring every woman in her circle noticed the blinding clarity of the stones. I watched her point a manicured finger toward the large digital display screens positioned around the room. The screens looped a highly edited, glamorous slideshow of the Hamptons estate they falsely believed they were closing on come Monday morning. "We are completely redesigning the West Wing," Madison bragged, her voice pitched high to ensure maximum attention. Jamal insisted we need a larger, entertaining space for the summer galas. It is exhausting managing multiple properties, of course, but when your husband is a financial prodigy, you simply have to adapt to the billionaire lifestyle. One of the wives smiled enviously. "You are so incredibly lucky, Madison. Does your sister ever visit you? I heard she was living in the city." Madison let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh, Rebecca, no, we do not invite her to our properties. It is terribly sad, really. She works some mind-numbing data entry job and lives in a shoebox. She is fiercely jealous of my marriage. Jamal actually had to ban her from our home because her bitter energy was just dragging down our entire aura. We tried to help her, but you cannot fix someone who refuses to be successful." I gripped the stem of my champagne flute, keeping my expression entirely neutral. But the true masterpiece of delusion was unfolding near the private bar. I moved slightly closer with Harrison stepping seamlessly behind a massive marble pillar to observe my parents. Richard and Catherine were speaking with the president of the local bank and his wife. My parents stood with perfect posture, projecting the refined image of seasoned, humble aristocrats who had simply guided their brilliant children to global success. I listened as Catherine placed a hand over her heart, adopting a look of profound, tragic sorrow. "It is just such a blessing," Catherine sighed dramatically. "Jamal and Madison are the absolute pillars of this family. We could not be prouder of the empire they are building." The bank president nodded respectfully, taking a sip of his bourbon. "They are certainly making waves. And your other daughter, is she not here to celebrate tonight? I heard she recently completed a master's degree." Richard stepped in quickly, shaking his head with a perfectly rehearsed expression of heavy paternal grief. "We prefer not to speak about it on such a joyous night, but since you ask it, is an absolute tragedy. Rebecca suffered a complete psychological collapse. She became dangerously obsessed with Jamal's financial success. The jealousy consumed her until she completely lost her grip on reality. Catherine dabbed the corner of her eye with a cocktail napkin, playing the role of the devastated mother with Oscar-worthy precision. We had to make the agonizing decision to institutionalize her. She was fabricating wild, paranoid delusions about Jamal's finances. She even tried to forge documents to ruin his reputation out of pure spite. We pay for the best private psychiatric facility in the state, of course, but she refuses to let us visit. We had to cut ties to protect Madison and Jamal from her toxic, violent outbursts. It breaks my heart, but we must protect the family. The sheer breathtaking malice of their lie washed over me like ice water. They were not just ignoring my existence. They were actively assassinating my character to elevate their own social standing. They were painting me as a deranged, jealous lunatic to preemptively discredit any truth I might ever try to expose. They used my name as a stepping stone to build their own tragic, heroic narrative, soaking up the sympathetic pats on the arm from the elite wives. Harrison stepped up right beside me, having heard every single word of their performance. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. I have dismantled hostile corporate boards, gutted corrupt enterprises, and dealt with international mercenaries, Harrison murmured, his voice laced with dark, razor-sharp amusement. But the sheer sociopathic audacity of your parents truly belongs in a clinical textbook. They are digging their own graves with a silver spoon. I looked at my father, who was now laughing loudly with the bank president, completely unbothered by the monstrous lie he had just delivered about his own daughter. I looked at my mother, smiling graciously, as a waiter handed her a fresh drink. They had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. They had mortgaged their family home to fund this exact moment. They had sold their souls for a few hours of fake applause. Harrison stepped forward smoothly, retrieving a small remote from his tailored tuxedo jacket. He did not raise his voice yet. The sheer authority in his posture demanded absolute silence from the hundreds of elite guests gathered in the ballroom. With a single click of the remote, the massive digital displays surrounding the room went pitch black. The glamorous looping slideshow of the Hamptons estate vanished entirely. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as the screens flickered back to life, illuminating the grand space with a harsh clinical blue light. Displayed across every screen in the venue was the undeniable, heavily encrypted corporate logo of Aegis Global, followed immediately by the undeniable financial architecture of Jamal's fraud. I watched the local real estate developers, the politicians, and the socialites squint at the high-definition displays. It took them only a few seconds to comprehend the devastating data flashing before their eyes. The screens showed the Cayman Island routing numbers, the zero-balance domestic accounts, and the staggering deficit of Jamal's fake venture capital fund. Harrison lifted a microphone, his voice cutting through the heavy, suffocated air of the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison announced, his tone utterly devoid of mercy. "You were invited here tonight to celebrate an acquisition. Aegis Global has indeed finalized the buyout of this venture capital firm. However, we did not acquire a thriving financial institution. We acquired a highly active crime scene. The charts you are currently viewing represent the forensic audit conducted by my Vice President of Threat Intelligence, Rebecca. They detail a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme engineered by the man standing in the center of this room." The reaction was instantaneous and brutal. The wealthy investors who had been shaking Jamal's hand and drinking his expensive champagne just minutes ago physically recoiled. A prominent bank executive slammed his crystal glass onto a passing tray, glaring at Jamal with pure, unadulterated venom. The country club wives who had been fawning over Madison's $20,000 diamond necklace took synchronized steps backward, treating my sister as if she were highly radioactive. Jamal's face was covered in a slick sheen of terrified sweat. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows. He frantically held up his hands, attempting a pathetic, unconvincing laugh. "This is a misunderstanding," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking horribly. "This is a corporate sabotage attempt. The data is manipulated. I have the actual ledgers in my office. I reached out and took the microphone from Harrison. I did not yell. I spoke with the calm, lethal precision of an executioner. There are no ledgers, Jamal. There are no secondary investment tiers. There is only a massive gaping hole where your investors' money used to be. You used their capital to rent this ballroom. You used their retirement funds to buy that custom white tuxedo. And you used my parents' blind, arrogant desperation for social status to secure your final bridge loan. My father, Richard, stumbled forward. His face was a horrifying mask of denial and terror. He grabbed my arm again, his fingers trembling violently. "Rebecca, stop this right now!" Richard pleaded, his voice entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. "You are ruining us. We vouched for him. We leveraged our assets for him. If you do not shut those screens off, we will lose everything." I looked at the man who had called my graduation pointless. I looked at the man who had told me to call him when I made real money. I pulled my arm away from him with slow, deliberate disgust. "You already lost everything, Richard." I stated clearly, ensuring the microphone caught every single syllable. "You did not just lose your reputation tonight. You lost your home." When you handed Jamal your financial credentials to help him secure that bridge loan, he did not just use your clean credit. He leveraged the deed to your suburban estate. He used your house as collateral against his fraudulent debt. Apex Holdings now owns the primary lien on your property. And since Jamal's fund is entirely bankrupt, your estate will be seized to pay back a fraction of the investors he defrauded. My mother, Catherine, let out a visceral, agonizing scream. Her knees buckled beneath her designer dress, and she collapsed against my father. She clawed at his tuxedo jacket, her perfectly styled hair falling in chaotic strands across her face. "Tell me she is lying, Richard." Catherine sobbed hysterically, her socialite facade completely shattered. "Tell me we did not give him the house. Tell me we are not homeless." Richard could not answer her. He stared at the massive digital screens, his eyes tracing the undeniable flow of funds from their personal banking accounts directly into Jamal's empty shell corporations. The reality of his absolute ruin crashed over him, paralyzing him in the center of the ballroom. He had traded his daughter for a charismatic con artist, and the price of that transaction was his entire life's work. Madison turned on Jamal like a rabid animal. She grabbed the lapels of his white tuxedo, shaking him with terrifying violence. "You told me we were billionaires," Madison shrieked, her voice echoing painfully through the quiet room. "You told me we were closing on the Hamptons estate on Monday. You promised me a life of luxury. You lied to me. You stole my parents' house." Jamal tried to push her away, his eyes darting frantically toward the service doors at the back of the venue. "Madison, shut up," Jamal hissed desperately. "We need to leave right now. We need to get to the airport." He did not even take a single step toward the exit. The heavy oak service doors burst open with a deafening crash. A tactical team of federal agents flooded into the grand ballroom, their dark windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI. The luxurious string quartet music had long since stopped, replaced by the heavy, authoritative stomping of combat boots against the polished marble floor. "Nobody move," the lead federal agent barked, his hand resting firmly on his holstered weapon. The crowd of elite guests immediately parted, creating a wide, clear path from the entrance directly to the center of the room, where Jamal stood frozen in terror. Jamal, the agent, announced, pulling a thick stack of warrants from his jacket. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Put your hands behind your back." Jamal's knees gave out. He dropped to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, as two agents hoisted him up and aggressively snapped heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The metal clicked with a sharp, undeniable finality. His custom white tuxedo was instantly wrinkled and ruined as they shoved him forward. Madison lunged after them, crying hysterically, reaching out for her husband. "Wait, you cannot take him." Madison begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "We have a gala. We are important people. You are making a mistake." A female federal agent stepped into Madison's path, holding up a stern hand. "Ma'am, step back. Your husband's assets are currently being frozen by the federal government. Furthermore, we have a warrant to confiscate any items purchased with fraudulent funds over the last 48 hours. The agent pointed directly at Madison's chest. "Take off the diamond necklace. Now." Madison gasped, clutching the $20,000 necklace as if it were her own child. "No, it is a gift. It is mine. Take it off, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice and possession of stolen property." The agent commanded, her voice leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. Trembling uncontrollably, Madison fumbled with the clasp. She handed the glittering diamonds over to the federal agent, sobbing as the physical proof of her fake wealth was dropped carelessly into a clear plastic evidence bag. She looked utterly pathetic, stripped of her stolen armor, standing barefoot in her designer gown because she could barely balance in her heels through the panic. The elite guests watched this spectacle with a mixture of horror and profound disgust. These were people who guarded their reputations fiercely. Association with a federally indicted con artist was a social death sentence. One by one, they turned their backs on my family. The prominent bank executive signaled to his wife, and they walked briskly toward the exit without offering a single glance of sympathy to my parents. The country club socialites gathered their coats, whispering venomous judgments as they filed out of the ballroom. Richard and Catherine were left standing completely alone in the center of the vast, echoing room. The champagne fountain continued to bubble merrily, a mocking backdrop to their total destruction. My father looked broken, a hollow shell of the arrogant patriarch who had constantly belittled my existence. My mother sat on the floor next to Madison, both of them weeping into their hands, entirely abandoned by the high society they had worshipped. I handed the microphone back to the terrified event coordinator. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Harrison Croft, watching the federal agents escort Jamal out through the main lobby doors. Harrison adjusted his cuffs, his expression one of mild, satisfied boredom. "A very productive evening, Rebecca. The authorities have the criminal, our corporation has the assets, and the trash has effectively taken itself out." I looked at my parents one last time. They slowly raised their heads, their tear-streaked faces looking at me with a sickening mixture of shock, betrayal, and sudden, desperate realization. They finally understood that the daughter they had discarded was the only person powerful enough to save them, and she had absolutely no intention of doing so. Richard took a weak, stumbling step toward me. "Rebecca, please, my father," whispered, his voice cracking with utter despair. "You have to stop this. You work for that company. You can tell them to release the lien on our house. We are your family. We are your blood." I met his pleading eyes with an expression of pure, unyielding ice. "You told me that a graduation ceremony was just a pointless piece of paper, Richard. You told me that success is measured by tangible assets and the social standing you command. Well, look around you. Your tangible assets are currently locked in a federal evidence bag. Your social standing just walked out the front door in disgust. And your perfect golden son-in-law is currently sitting in the back of an FBI vehicle." I stepped closer, lowering my voice, so only my broken family could hear the finality of my verdict. "You demanded that I call you when I made some real money," I said, my words cutting through them like shattered glass. "I made $5 million today. But I am not calling you. I am never calling you again. You chose your perfect family. Now you get to burn with them." I turned my back on them. I did not wait to hear my mother's screaming apologies. I did not wait to hear Madison's pathetic begging. I placed my hand on Harrison's offered arm, and we walked out of the grand ballroom together. The heavy brass doors shut firmly behind us, sealing Richard, Catherine, and Madison inside the luxurious tomb of their own making. The cool night air of the city greeted us as we stepped onto the street. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the pavement, casting long, triumphant shadows behind us. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling lighter than I had in 33 years. The debt was paid. The toxic roots were severed. I was finally completely and unapologetically free. What unexpected sources of support have you discovered during difficult times? The weekend following the gala was a masterclass in swift, merciless federal justice. Jamal was denied bail entirely, deemed an extreme flight risk by the presiding judge, and remanded to a high-security federal holding facility. The media frenzy was absolute. Every local news channel and financial blog ran front-page exposés detailing the spectacular collapse of his fraudulent venture capital empire. By Tuesday morning, the consequences crashed down upon my parents and sister with the brutal, unfeeling efficiency of the banking system. Through the legal updates provided by the Aegis Global corporate attorneys, I was kept fully informed of their rapid descent into total ruin. Apex Holdings officially executed the primary lien on the suburban estate. It happened on a freezing, bitterly cold morning. The frost was still thick on their perfectly manicured lawn when federal marshals and bank representatives arrived to change the locks. Richard, Catherine, and Madison were given exactly 30 minutes to vacate the premises. They were strictly prohibited from removing any items of significant value, as almost everything inside the house had been purchased using Jamal's fraudulent credit lines or leveraged against the property itself. Madison's designer luggage, her extensive wardrobe, and her imported vehicles were all seized as proceeds of a crime. They were left standing on the icy curb, shivering in the biting wind, clutching cheap duffel bags containing a few basic necessities. The elite country club friends they had spent decades trying to impress drove past them without stopping. The wealthy neighbors pulled their curtains shut entirely, unwilling to associate with a family currently plastered across every major fraud headline in the state. They were completely devastatingly isolated. Every door they knocked on was slammed shut. Every phone call they made for help went straight to voicemail. While they experienced the freezing reality of their consequences, I was settling into a vastly different atmosphere. I had utilized a fraction of my $5 million signing bonus to lease a sprawling multi-level penthouse in the highest security residential tower in the financial district. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city biometric security protocols and a dedicated private elevator. It was a silent, untouchable fortress. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely safe. Thursday night brought a severe winter storm, dropping the temperature below freezing as sleet lashed against the glass walls of my penthouse. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing the final security patches for the Aegis Global mainframe, when my smart home security system chimed with a harsh, urgent tone. The facial recognition software linked to the ground floor security gate had flagged 3 unauthorized individuals attempting to gain access to the private lobby. I tapped the control panel on my desk, bringing up the live high-definition camera feed. I stared at the screen, a cold, analytical detachment washing over me. There they were, Richard, Catherine, and Madison. They looked absolutely pathetic. They were huddled together under the harsh, glaring security light of the building entrance, desperately trying to shield themselves from the freezing rain. Madison's hair was a tangled, unwashed mess plastered to her wet cheeks. Her designer makeup was entirely gone, revealing pale, exhausted skin. She was shivering violently, wrapped in a thin, generic coat that offered zero protection against the storm. Catherine looked completely broken. Her posture slumped, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she aggressively mashed the intercom button. Richard stared directly into the camera lens with hollow, bloodshot eyes, stripping away his arrogant patriarch facade to reveal a terrified, broken old man. They had somehow tracked down my new address. They had nowhere else to go. The cheap motel they had checked into on Tuesday must have drained the very last of their hidden cash reserves. Now facing the literal freezing streets, they had crawled to the doorstep of the daughter they had repeatedly called a worthless, toxic failure. I reached out and pressed the microphone icon on my control panel. "State your business," I commanded, my voice echoing out of the external security speaker, cutting sharply through the sound of the howling wind. Catherine jolted at the sound of my voice. She practically threw herself against the heavy steel security gate, gripping the metal bars with freezing fingers. "Rebecca." Catherine sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered desperation. "Please, please, sweetheart, open the gate. It is freezing out here. We are soaking wet." They took the house. They took the cars. They froze every single bank account. We have absolutely nothing left. We have not eaten since yesterday. Please let us in." I sat back in my plush leather chair, watching her tears mix with the freezing rain on the high-definition monitor. "You told the bank president I was locked away in a psychiatric facility," I stated calmly. "You told your friends I was a violent, jealous lunatic. Why would you want to seek shelter with someone so dangerous, Catherine?" I was lying. Catherine wailed, her voice rising in a hysterical pitch. I was trying to protect our image. I was so stupid. I am sorry. I am so sorry, Rebecca. Just press the button. Let your family inside. We will freeze to death out here. Madison pushed her way to the intercom, her teeth visibly chattering. She gripped the metal bars, tears streaming down her face. Rebecca, you cannot do this, Madison cried, her voice stripped of all its former arrogant entitlement. My husband is in federal prison. I am completely homeless. I had to leave my entire life behind in that house. I have $20 to my name. You are my sister. You have a penthouse. You have $5 million. You cannot just leave your own sister out on the street like garbage. I leaned closer to the microphone, my expression entirely unreadable. You had no problem treating me like garbage when you thought you were ascending to the billionaire bracket, Madison. You literally told me to enjoy my microwave dinner while you partied with stolen money. You demanded I go into massive debt just so you could secure your summer social calendar in the Hamptons. Richard stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on Catherine's shoulder. He looked into the camera, attempting to summon a shred of his old authoritative negotiating tactics, but his voice shook violently from the cold. Rebecca, enough. Richard pleaded, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. You proved your point. You won. You destroyed Jamal and you took our home. We are standing here begging you. We are your blood. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us the basic human decency of shelter. You have the money to pay off the lien on the estate. You can buy the house back for us. You can hire a legal team to help Jamal. Family protects its own. Please. I stared at the three of them on the monitor. They were not apologizing because they felt remorse for decades of emotional abuse and financial manipulation. They were apologizing because they were cold, hungry, and entirely out of options. They were invoking the concept of family only because it was the last available currency they had to extort my resources. Family protects its own, I repeated slowly, letting the words resonate through the external speaker. That is a fascinating philosophy, Richard. Because when I was working night shifts to survive drowning in $80,000 of student debt, you refused to co-sign a single piece of paper to protect me. When I was struggling, you called my education a pointless piece of paper. You called me a bitter, isolated failure. Rebecca, please! Catherine screamed, sliding down to her knees on the wet, freezing pavement. We are your parents. You cannot turn your back on your own flesh and blood. Have some mercy. Mercy. I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, absolute calm. Mercy is for people who make honest mistakes. You did not make a mistake. You made calculated, malicious choices. You chose to leverage your entire future on a charismatic criminal. You chose to publicly assassinate my character to elevate your social standing. You chose Jamal over me. Madison sobbed loudly, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the biting wind. We will do anything, she begged, her voice barely a whisper. We will work. We will pay you back. Just let us inside. I am so cold, Rebecca. I am so cold. You are experiencing the reality of your own actions, Madison, I stated firmly, offering absolutely zero sympathy. You built a fantasy world on stolen funds and now the bill is due. I am not your safety net. I am not your bank. And I am certainly not your family. Richard slammed his fist against the heavy steel gate, the metallic thud barely audible over the roaring wind. You cannot do this, Rebecca, he bellowed, his voice cracking, shedding the last remnants of his dignified patriarch persona. We are your parents. We raised you. We put food on your table for 18 years. You owe us. I leaned into the microphone, my voice slicing through the digital connection with surgical precision. You did not raise me, Richard. You housed me because the law required it. And the moment I turned 18, you made it abundantly clear that my presence was a burden. You told me to figure it out. So I did. I worked night shifts. I drowned in debt. I figured it out while you funded Madison's luxury vacations and paid off her credit cards. Catherine pressed her face against the iron bars, the sleep plastering her graying hair to her forehead. Please, sweetheart. We were wrong. We were so blinded by Jamal. We thought he was building an empire for us. We just wanted to be proud. You wanted to show off, I corrected her, instantly offering no quarter. Do you remember the text message you sent me exactly 1 week ago, Catherine? I was standing completely alone in my graduation gown. I had just achieved something that took 5 grueling years of my life. Do you remember what you said to me? Catherine squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing so violently her shoulders shook. She remembered. You told me my graduation was pointless, I stated, quoting her exact words with brutal clarity. You said it was really just handing out a piece of paper. You said you had to stay in the city to toast Jamal and Madison because they were closing on a $2 million mansion. You told me family comes first, and then you explicitly excluded me from that family. I paused, letting the biting wind howl through the speaker before continuing. Well, Catherine, it turns out my pointless piece of paper is the only thing standing between me and the freezing rain tonight. That piece of paper secured a vice president title at a $25 billion corporation. That piece of paper bought this penthouse. Your toast to Jamal bought you a federal seizure notice and a spot on the sidewalk. Madison let out a miserable, broken wail. She slumped against the brick pillar of the security gate, wrapping her arms tightly around her knees. We have nothing, Rebecca. My husband is in jail. My friends will not even answer my calls. I am wearing a coat I found in a donation bin. You have to let us in, just for one night, just to get warm. I looked at my sister, the golden child who had spent her entire life mocking my clothes, my apartment, and my ambitions. You told me my career was a hobby for antisocial people, I said, directing my voice squarely at her. You said I sat in a dark room staring at computer code because I was pathetic. My antisocial hobby just audited your entire fake existence, Madison. My computer code handed your husband over to the FBI. You laughed at me for saving my credit score. You asked if I was saving it for a video game console. No, Madison. I was saving it so I would never end up begging on a sidewalk like you are right now. Richard looked up at the security camera, his face a portrait of utter devastation. The freezing sleet was accumulating on the shoulders of his thin jacket. He was shivering so violently he could barely stand upright. Rebecca, please. Richard begged, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. I was wrong. I was a terrible father. I see that now. But you are better than this. You are better than us. Show us some mercy. I am asking you as your father. Call down to the lobby. Let us sleep on the floor. Just give us shelter. I stared at the high-definition monitor. I saw the absolute defeat in his eyes. I saw the desperate hollow panic in my mother's face. I saw the complete destruction of my sister's vanity. A week ago, this sight might have brought me a sense of vengeful joy. But now, sitting in my secure, warm office, I felt only a profound, clarifying indifference. They were strangers to me, strangers who had made a series of highly calculated, malicious choices and were now demanding that I absorb the cost of their failure. I am better than you, I agreed, my voice echoing out into the storm. Which is exactly why I am not going to let you drag me down with you. You told me that success is measured by tangible assets, Richard. You told me that a piece of paper from a university does not pay the bills. You looked me dead in the eye and told me to call you when I made some real money. I leaned closer to the microphone, delivering the final fatal blow. I made $5 million on the exact same day you told me I was a failure. I made real money, but I am not calling you to share it. I am calling to tell you that your tangible assets are gone because you trusted a charismatic con artist over your own flesh and blood. You gambled your entire life on a flashy suit and a fake smile. You placed your bets. Now collect your winnings. Rebecca! No! Catherine screamed, clawing at the metal gate. You cannot leave us out here. You are our daughter. I was your scapegoat, I corrected her, my tone dropping to a freezing absolute zero. I was your punching bag. I was the baseline you used to make yourselves feel superior. But that contract is permanently terminated. You built your own hell. Now you get to freeze in it. I reached out and pressed the red disconnect button on my security console. The two-way audio feed instantly cut off. The sounds of their screaming, the howling wind, and the freezing sleet were entirely silenced. The high-definition monitor still displayed the live video feed. I watched them realize the intercom light had gone dark. I watched my father pound his fists helplessly against the unyielding steel. I watched my mother collapse onto the wet pavement, burying her face in her hands. I watched Madison stare up at the towering glass skyscraper, fully comprehending that the sister she had mocked her entire life was sitting in a fortress of wealth and power, completely out of her reach forever. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. I felt the pure, unadulterated peace of a closed chapter. I tapped the screen once more, turning off the camera feed completely. The monitor faded to black, mirroring the exact amount of space they now occupied in my life. Absolutely none. The rest of the weekend passed in a state of absolute undisturbed tranquility. I did not check the local news to see where they ended up sleeping that freezing night. I did not monitor the police scanners for updates on Jamal. I woke up on Sunday morning to bright, clear sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. I brewed a cup of premium espresso, stepped out onto my private balcony, and watched the city wake up beneath me. I was breathing air that felt entirely clean, scrubbed free of the suffocating judgment I had inhaled for 33 years. The silence in my home was not lonely. It was the sound of a total victory. 6 months later, I stood at the head of the primary executive boardroom at Aegis Global. The room was packed with the top defense contractors, federal cybersecurity directors, and international banking executives from across the globe. I was no longer just the brilliant mind behind a new algorithm. I was the undisputed authority on global threat intelligence. I wore a tailored ivory suit that projected absolute control. I was projecting the final integration metrics of my quantum-resistant framework onto the massive holographic display. The executives watched with rapt attention, furiously taking notes as I broke down the defensive architecture that was now securing their billions. When I concluded the presentation, there was a moment of stunned silence before genuine resounding applause broke out across the boardroom. Harrison Croft sat at the far end of the long obsidian table, a proud, sharp smile on his face. He did not claim my success as his own. He did not try to diminish my spotlight. He simply nodded, acknowledging that hiring me was the most profitable decision he had ever made. I had generated billions in secured contracts for Aegis Global, and my personal net worth had skyrocketed through executive stock options. I commanded a team of elite engineers who respected my intellect and trusted my leadership. The ghosts of my past were exactly that, ghosts. The federal prosecutor had been utterly merciless with Jamal. He was sentenced to 20 years in a high-security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. His fraudulent empire was meticulously dissected, and every stolen dollar was traced, reclaimed, and returned to his victims. Richard, Catherine, and Madison had faced the brutal, unforgiving reality of their sudden absolute poverty. Without my financial bailout, they were forced to move into a cramped, dilapidated apartment complex on the far industrial outskirts of the city. Richard was forced to take a minimum-wage job scanning receipts at a local big-box retail store, a profoundly humiliating fall for a man who used to boast about his exclusive country club handicap. Madison was currently working the cash register at a fast food drive-thru, her designer wardrobe permanently replaced by a greasy polyester uniform. Catherine spent her days desperately trying to sell their story to cheap tabloids, painting themselves as the tragic victims of a ruthless billionaire daughter. But the media had already seen the undeniable federal evidence of their extortion attempts. The public completely ignored them. They faded into total obscurity, suffocating in the exact same poverty they used to mock me for enduring. But I refused to let my legacy be defined solely by the destruction of my toxic family. True power is not just the ability to dismantle a threat. True power is the capacity to build something magnificent in its place. On the 1-year anniversary of my supposedly pointless graduation, I stood in the grand atrium of a newly renovated building in the city center. The polished bronze letters above the entrance read, "The Unseen Foundation." I had personally funded the entire initiative using a significant portion of my corporate bonuses. The Unseen was a comprehensive scholarship and grant program designed exclusively for independent self-made students who lacked familial support. It provided full university tuition, living stipends, and elite industry mentorships for young adults who were working grueling night shifts and drowning in debt just to achieve their dreams. I wanted to find the students who were studying in cramped studio apartments, the ones whose parents called their ambitions a waste of time, the ones who had to fight a war for every single inch of ground they gained. I stood on the podium looking out at the first class of scholarship recipients. Their faces were bright with relief, ambition, and profound gratitude. They did not have to take out predatory loans. They did not have to endure emotional abuse just to secure a cosigner. I was giving them the exact financial and emotional armor I had been ruthlessly denied. When I handed the very first student her fully funded scholarship portfolio, she shook my hand, tears of sheer relief shining in her eyes. She told me she had been working 3 jobs to pay for her computer science degree. I saw my younger self in her posture, in her exhaustion, and in her undeniable brilliance. But she would not have to spend a decade fighting to prove her worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding her. I had already leveled the playing field for her. She could simply focus on being extraordinary. As the foundation ceremony concluded, Harrison Croft approached me, handing me a glass of sparkling water. He looked around the vibrant, hopeful room, taking in the magnitude of what my wealth had accomplished. "You built an empire," Rebecca Harrison noted quietly, his voice filled with genuine respect. I took a sip of my water, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace settling deep into my bones. "I built a sanctuary," I corrected him. The sweetest revenge is not just watching your enemies burn in the fires they lit themselves. It is using the warmth of those flames to build a life so brilliant, so successful, and so full of genuine purpose that their darkness can never reach you again. I walked out of the atrium and into the bustling city streets, completely surrounded by the magnificent, unbreakable life I had built with my own 2 hands. The invisible, disappointing daughter was gone forever. I was exactly where I belonged. The gripping story of Rebecca offers a profound lesson on the nature of true success and healing after deep familial betrayal. When subjected to relentless emotional abuse and manipulation, it is incredibly tempting to let anger and bitterness dictate our actions. However, this narrative powerfully illustrates that the most devastating form of revenge is not found in merely watching your abusers face their own ruin. Instead, ultimate vindication is achieved by outgrowing them entirely. Rebecca's journey teaches us that true power lies in redirecting the energy of our trauma into building an unbreakable, authentic life. By establishing the unseen foundation, she transformed her deepest wounds into a sanctuary for others, ensuring they would never have to endure the same isolation. This transition from a targeted victim to a compassionate, self-made leader demonstrates that we are not defined by the limitations or cruelty of those who failed to value us. We reclaim our narrative when we stop seeking validation from toxic sources and start building our own empires. Take a moment today to evaluate the boundaries in your own life and dare to redirect your energy toward building a future where your worth is defined solely by you.